Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. We got our first time talking to the man, Tony Blauer, here. I am very excited to get this started. Now, while I am excited, y'all should be too. Make sure you are doing all the things, liking the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, on Wednesdays. Now, let's get right into an intro and then we'll dive right into the conversation. So, Tony, give us a 10 to 15-second blurb. Who are you, where you come from, all that good stuff. Hit it.
Impossible to do in 10 or 15 seconds, but my name's Tony Blauer. I have been a martial artist, self-defense, combative guy since literally 1977, and just been teaching 40 years. This is my whole life. This morning I was watching an old rare clip of Bruce Lee being interviewed by Pierre Burton. So a little shout out to Canadian newscasters. And it was a clip that reminded us to always keep moving and always keep reinventing ourselves and always keep growing. And it made me realize that Bruce was my first mentor, even though, of course, I never met him. He passed away in 1973 when I was 13. But it was his journey and his life story that inspired me to want to become a martial artist, self-defense practitioner. And here we are, 50 years later. That's what I do.
Still kicking butt. I like it. I like it. Well, then let's get right into this. Well, Sean, how's the mountains? Got any you got any fights with bears lately?
Yeah, on Tony's point, that's how I started martial arts as well, was tracking Bruce Lee. He's always been the man in my books. Maybe closely followed by Miyamoto Musashi, but Bruce Lee's the man, and that's probably been the biggest philosophical and martial arts influencer in my life as a whole, for sure.
So let's actually, before we even get into the conversation, I have a couple clips here that we can watch and kind of discuss. But for those that don't know, what is the system that you've developed? So I know I've watched it for the last little while, Sean, and the three of us were talking about it in the green room here. But can you give us a little brief rundown on the spear system and just generally what it is you teach in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole origin story to that, and the spear system, of course, isn't how I started. I started in Taekwondo. I had wrestled before that. I fell in love with boxing, and then I noticed whenever I had a confrontation. I grew up in a nice area. I didn't have a lot of fights growing up, but when you're 17, 18, 19, 20, testosterone young, you get your driver's license, you get into conflict, and I noticed an overwhelming amount of fear and adrenaline that wasn't being regulated via the training. So I thought there was something missing there. And then I was teaching this kid, a 15-year-old kid named Mitch. I was only 20 at the time. It was 1980. I was teaching this 15-year-old kid, Mitch, privately. He was being bullied in school, and his dad knew I was into martial arts. And he said, hey, I'll pay you to train Mitch. And so I train Mitch. What do I teach him? I teach him how to clinch. I teach him how to grapple a little bit. I teach him how to strike. I teach him how to kick. I come back for his a lesson, and he had gotten into a physical conflict with this bully who dropped him with a left hook. And Mitch is freaking out. It's beep, 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 beep. That's me beeping myself because of what he was swearing. And when he debriefed, and I said, even though like I was only 20 years old, I said, well, what do you mean? Like, you're asserting yourself and he drops you at a left hook. Like, why didn't you wax on, wax off? And that, of course, is a joke because Karate Kid wasn't even a movie back then. But why didn't you do any of the complex motor skills that you're taught in every martial art? And he says to me, he looks at me and he goes, well, when the altercation kind of amplified, when things got heated and he shoved me, I grabbed him and I slammed him against the locker bank. And I told him, don't ever put your hands on me again. And as he's saying this, he then goes, and I had my school books in my other hand. So imagine if everyone's looking at me, if you're watching this, I grab your lapel and I'm holding school books. Well, how easy is it to get punched in the face? You would never box with stuff in your hands. You're going to get punched in the face. And in that moment, and I swear this was this metaphysical experience. It was like the god of self-defense hit me with a lightning bolt. And I said to myself, oh my God, I taught him self-defense wrong. And then I said, oh my God, we teach self-defense wrong. Remember, this was 1980. Most people were sparring for self-defense. And I realized in that moment that everything I taught him were just tools that he could use once a physical fight started, that there were no tools for pre-fight and in-fight. Pre-fight is, how do I self-regulate? How do I control my breathing? How do I control my mind? And then morally, ethically, legally, how do I diffuse and de-escalate? And none of that was there. And that day, I started, just everything became scenario based. Fast forward, we were doing something called the panic attack. Shaun, you probably heard about that back in the day. It was Panther Productions released this video. These were like full on like fights, headbutts, elbows. We were wearing Kyokushinkai, plexiglass helmet, baseball shin guards, the Taekwondo wooden chest guards. It was like a Frankenstein, a piece of equipment. Years later, we developed the high gear suit for scenario training. But we did that for several years, and I kept noticing, and this was like Fight Club. We were doing like Fight Club. Once a month, we'd get together and beat the living crap out of each other, but always through the viewfinder of what's a scenario. We would say, what would really suck? And it'd be like a 3-on-1 or 2-on-2, or, you were drunk. We would do things. Okay, let's say we're drunk. So we'd spin around so that when we stopped spinning, we were wobbly, and then two guys would approach you. But it never was sparring, guys. It always started with the verbal. It always started with, I need some money. Give me your wallet. Some sort of scenario that got you talking. But I did that for 5 years. And then I noticed that people who were signing up still seemed to panic, hyperventilate. Some people started to cry. We had, women and men doing these things. And I noticed something huge, that only the people who managed their fear managed to fight. And the fights were never technical. They were always messy, like real fights. And then about 1985, 86, we were doing these drills. And I noticed that whenever the role playing was really good and somebody got surprised, there always was a flinch, a startle response. And you can see this now. People just don't know to look at it. If you kind of stimulate the reticular activating system of your mind, you'll notice that our favorite fighters flinch all the time. But they're so stress inoculated from the sparring and the preparation of their fights, we don't notice the value or how they're using the flinch. And in some cases, they don't know. But anyways, what happened was, because we were recording everything and I'd studied this stuff, I noticed that if I was talking to you and then, let's say Shaun was the enemy role player and he went to sucker punch me, I wasn't doing wax on, wax off. If I was in a conversation, there was a startle response where the hands came up to protect the head. If there was time and space, I'd push away danger. And I started playing with this. This is 1986, 87, all the time. And I said, there's something here. It was almost like the startle response was a biological airbag. It deployed to push you away from danger, and it almost always intercepted whatever the attack was. Tackle, headbutt, haymaker, a chair, a baseball bat. And so this was my incubator period, was the 80s, and I know this is long, but it's so important. What is SPEAR? SPEAR is the acronym now for Spontaneous Protection Enabling Accelerated Response. Spontaneous protection refers to the startle response that is hardwired, DNA level survival reflex in every human. Accelerated response is this idea that we're going to lean into our survival system. We're going to actually embrace it and then get our executive function, cognitive brain, to go, how can I use this? And the hypothesis in the 80s, this was actually our thesis statement when I began training military and law enforcement. I would say, what does your body do prior to any training? Does that have a protective or a tactical application? If the answer is yes, then why aren't we using that? Because situational awareness is a conscious cognitive skill. Everyone can be surprised. In the moment of surprise, I don't care if you're like trained or untrained. The neurobiological response to surprise is uniform across the species. So I could have somebody like from Shaun from your old unit to an untrained person, and they're both sitting there on their phone, and someone comes in and opens fire, or a bomb goes off, or someone just says, you're on the golf course, look out. both the trained person, untrained person will, their auditory system will try and orient on the sound wave. The sound wave is what hits them first, metaphorically and literally. Then their optic nerve in their eyes are going to try and figure out and orient, but they're both going to do this. If that threat came from, let's say, 3 o'clock, look out. They're both doing this in that moment. The difference between the untrained person and the trained person is the untrained person will continue to turn, and the trained person will turn, but then their training, like an immediate action drill, will start to convert into something they did. So we created an entire system around understanding how to weaponize, to convert the startle response when you're surprised. And here we are 40 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great concept as well, in the fact that I know there's when people are when they burn, there's a natural reaction to bring your hands up like this, like it's a protective mechanism. So it makes a whole lot of sense. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
Not at all. I mean, I totally agree with all of the points that Tony is making, and it is a biological response that he's folded into a system to create some self-defense structure and then build out of that. So for anyone who's listening right now, if all you took away was when something surprises you or when someone jumps you in a back alley or whatever the case is that you're seeing in your mind's eye right now, you're going to respond. But Tony then builds off of that response. So it's not just how you spear or how you react to the moment, it's how you follow through on that moment. So maybe we'll get into that here in a sec.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do have a quick comment here. Tim joining us. 20 is the man, a great Canadian. He says, I trained his system in Edmonton through Callan Payne. So absolutely. Good to see you, Tim. Now, I have a quick thought on something along this line here. I was listening to a podcast with Eric Tung, our good friend, Commander Eric Tung, with Dave Grossman. And one of the lines that Dave had said was, you don't lose your temper, you give it away. And I thought this was a really poignant thought, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on this as well, in terms of self-defense, in terms of martial arts in general. I think a lot of times we kind of rely on the fact that, you know, we're well trained and we can do things and we are maybe more capable than the average citizen, but we rarely do work on the mental side of the aspect of it. I know lots of people who are black belts in karate who they're not black belts in control. Let's put it that way, mental control. But what have you noticed in your years in the martial arts world on the development of self-mastery, I guess? Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and just to name drop, Dave's an old dear friend of ours, and so cool to hear him up here. But I like that quote. A lot of quotes, like, they make you think, and that's the purpose of them, to be provocative. You know, Alan Watts said, if you can't meditate in a boiler room, you just can't meditate. And, you know, so that's that whole idea of like, hey, I'm working on, guys, everyone be quiet. I need to meditate, but the world isn't quiet and your mind isn't quiet. So how do you find that flow state, in that from the there's chaos in a CQB environment, but the operator in the zone is doing what he's trained to and stays in that zone. How do we take the message and the spirit of that and then apply that to raising your kids? Like, how many people listening to this take traffic personally? How many of us have been at an elevator, we're running a little bit late, and we push the button 3-4 times, right? That's chaos in that moment. It's like the elevator doesn't know you're pushing the button, and it's certainly not going to get there faster just because you're angry and you're pushing. So this is like a really deep black box conversation for me, because if you notice the shirt I'm wearing, the everything that the lens I look through after over 60 years on the planet, and teaching people how to navigate what would be arguably the worst day of their life. Some people who are contrarians don't agree with that, but like sudden violence where you could maybe influence the outcome but didn't, might be the worst day of your life if you survive it. You know, other stuff could really suck, but you need a subject matter expert to fix it. Like your house is on fire, you know, you got to call the fire department. Sudden violence, it's mano a mano, it's happening to you. So, but like, that's just a different thought. So I'm huge. I love the conversation. I don't have anything um, like super short and succinct about that. Just the you know, one of my favorite, again, quotes are great if you think about them, meditate on them, and go, how does this going to influence my future self? Dan Millman, author of Way of the Peaceful Warrior. This isn't from the book, but most people know him if you know of him from that title. But he said something. I read an interview years later. He was a gymnast, but also a martial artist. He said, if you face just one opponent and you doubt yourself, you're outnumbered. And I always loved that. I've been sharing that one for decades. If you face just one opponent and you doubt yourself, you're outnumbered. Well, this is, again, the same thing of mental control, belief in yourself, giving yourself permission to win. I think when we lose our temper, like this idea of like, am I giving it away? I mean, to me, that's just clever words to make us think. There's work that has to be done before that self-awareness piece of like, why am I getting angry here? Why is this freaking me out? Why am I losing control? There's so many other parts to that before you get to the part where you know, where you can say, I'm not gonna let this person control my behavior. So
Absolutely.
no idea what I just said there, but
like, you know, it made sense to me. I'm down with it. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this one?
I do. I dig it. So the couple of things that maybe people can consider if they are in a situation that they're super uncomfortable with, we'll call it impending violence. Maybe it's in a shopping mall, maybe it's in a parking lot. Doesn't much matter where it is for now. So two things that I have held in my back pocket for a long, long time as on the lead up to any sort of violence. It's something that my dad said to me when I was a young boy, growing up in England. He told me the story through the lens of a situation when he was in Blackpool, if you know where Blackpool is in England. And he was on the beach, walking down the beach, and there's a bunch of guys about his age. Him and his buddy were walking down the beach. Bunch of guys walking towards him, and they kind of surrounded my dad and his buddy and said, you know, give us your money, give us your cigarettes, give us the whole nine. And my dad wasn't having anything to do with that. And I said, so what did you do? And he said, well, I waited until they got closer, and then I stepped up and hit the biggest guy, the leader, straight up in the grill and put him down on the floor, and then faced everyone else and said, who wants it next? And so he took out the leader, and I thought, noted. And then the second thing that I've always had in my back pocket as a young man was through the lens of Bruce Lee. And so I'm not sure if he said it specifically, but for some reason in the mid 80s, I got it in my head that Bruce Lee whispered in my ear this thing called the time lag response. And I've said time lag response about 1 million times. So, and I've typically always attributed it to Bruce Lee. And that's that idea behind if I'm going to hit you, you're just not going to stop it because I know when I'm going to throw and you don't. And the time lag response is such. The moment that I initiate, there is a human delay, and everyone's a bit different. There's science and biology, of course, but there's training and there's instinct, of course. And so, but if I fire a quick sucker punch at someone, and I used to be pretty dang fast, I was going to hit you, and you weren't going to do anything about it unless you had your head in the game and you knew that maybe it was about to go down. So I know from my perspective, the time lag response has always worked for me. If I'm initiating, I've got one step into the game already. But if someone is coming up on me and I think that they're an initiator, I'm looking for the moment where they're going to try to time lag response me. So I'm looking to all the usual stuff, blade and get a 90 and all of that typical stuff that we could talk about. But just the very knowledge of in my head from an early age of identify the leader if it's a group and apply the time lag response if it's going to go down.
This is an interesting point. One of the things I brought up when I was teaching jiu-jitsu just recently, we were going over the general self-defense program that we have within the jiu-jitsu program that I'm in. And it's it's a system, right? I do this, you do this. I do this, you do this, and it's about figuring out the fundamentals, obviously. But one of the things that I do mention kind of regularly is that violence will happen when you don't want it to, right? Like this is usually the time when violence shows up. It's not when you're ready. It's not when you're like, oh, okay, I guess we're gonna go get into a fight now. That rarely ever happens. It's sudden and it's vicious, and you really don't realize uh, how effective it is onto your system until it happens to you. So one of the things I do when I train them is I just will randomly I'll be like, hey, everybody, we're gonna work self defense today, and I will just bam throw somebody off like almost off the mats, and just to get it in their head like this is gonna happen when you're not ready for it, when you're not prepared for it. How much have you seen within your own system? Has it developed to a point that it is more realistic than some of the other martial arts systems that are out there, Tony?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And this is actually in different ways. It's some of the languaging that we use. I do this talk. I do these capability briefs for different commands and organizations. And the title of one of the talks is "Violence Loves Speed," and everything under it, the cascading research and principles under it are from the science of start response speeds, what moves first, eyes, head, neck, arms, torso, legs. How does that move? How does that interfere with our complex motor skills? To an area that, and this is what spawned this other division called No Fear, spelled KNOW, is understanding that the startle response is triggered by perceived danger, which is semantically like a type of fear. Your body fears getting burned, getting stabbed, getting hit, and so it recoils at a cellular level from it. But then, if the violence takes too long to happen, and that could be 1 second, it doesn't have to be, then the psychological system immediately goes into kind of this victimhood, this like, oh crap, I'm done. Oh my God, I'm late. Where's the cavalry? And you need to train. I'm trying to stop saying you need to and find different ways. It would enhance your survivability if you thought about that in advance of the attack and trained. What would I do in the military? They refer to this as immediate action. But even when I studied soldiers and other service members on their ambush and what they did, because their initial response was always, well, I did my immediate action drill. And I go, well, before that, what did you do that? What did you do? And they'd be all like, I don't know. And we would relive it and talk through it. And then they would all go, oh yeah, I did flinch. I did turn away. And then I jumped offline. And then there's this micro moment of managing fear. I don't know if you guys know the name Bob Willis. There are two books that were written for law enforcement, but they found themselves into many, military libraries. One was called Street Survival. The other one was called Tactical Edge. So when military units started doing more urban stuff, of course, they cross-trained with law enforcement. These were very famous books. They're encyclopedic, but Robert Willis was a well-known cop, co-authored the book with Gary Klugowitz. He saw me teaching our program in 1995 at an ASLET conference. ASLET was American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers. And he comes up to me after, he said, you're teaching the 3 seconds before the fight everyone else teaches. So I wasn't teaching. The most important or valuable part isn't, am I teaching a straight punch? Am I teaching a corkscrew punch? Am I teaching, front 2 knuckles? Is it, am I teaching something from Tai Chi? Am I teaching something from Wing Chun? Or it wasn't about that. I didn't care what your biomechanic toolbox was. What I cared was what you were doing emotionally, psychologically in those micro moments before things kicked off. And we created a chart called the timeline of violence that shows what we lovingly refer to as the 3Ds: detect, defuse, and then defend. Most most martial arts practice D3. So the 3Ds are detect and avoid, defuse and de-escalate, and if push comes to shove, defend. Most martial arts systems focus on the D3. And there's a rabbit hole I go down, and I'll throw it out there. At a neuroscience level, if you practice like I'm the hammer, everything's a nail. I'm the hammer, everything's a nail. And you don't practice any of the soft skills and internal skills like how am I going to control my breathing here? How am I going to control my mind here? How am I going to control my voice? What am I going to say here? There's so many areas I could go down right now. And you could pin this thought, maybe if we have time, go back to it. But I believe our D2 arsenal is more important than our D3 arsenal in most scenarios. In most scenarios, there's always verbal. And obviously, SWAT teams, in some cases, like a hostage rescue situation, and military teams, in some cases, you're not talking to, the opposition, like things are just happening because it's there. But in almost every other situation, there's self-talk, and then there's the external talk, and that all changes reaction time. I can totally change your reaction time by asking a question just before I time lag you into the neck, right? If I get you thinking or talking, I can change the speed of neuromuscular communication. And this is very important. Like, someone's got a gun and they go, give me your wallet. And if you say something that is congruent with the scenario, you will change the reaction time. And this is a tricky area. And I'll try to circle back to answer your question more directly, because you need to practice this stuff. You can improvise it and maybe you get away with it, but you need to practice it. And we call this in our scenario training, the difference between just doing scenario training and then reverse engineering and replicating. So we'll look at actual CCTV events and we will reenact those things through almost like a butterfly effect. If we did this here, if we did this here, to evaluate. So to your point, what's the difference with what we do and what most martial arts do? Most martial arts spend time in the D3 area where they're practicing what they would do. This violates parts of neuroscience and physics. Let me ask you guys, in a sudden violent encounter, who moves first? Not in a perfect world, not in a dream world. You're surprised that suddenly, like just as you said, hey guys, we're going to practice self-defense. Whap, you throw somebody off the mat. He didn't know it was going to be him, right? So that person falls and goes, look, that could have been you in front of a car over a balcony. That could have been a punch. Get the point? Head on a swivel. Like, it's fine to say that, but situational awareness, like I said earlier, is a conscious cognitive skill. So in physics, what's faster, action or reaction?
Action in my books.
Right? So action's faster from a physics definition. Action's faster than reaction. In a violent ambush, the bad guy, the opponent, is always action. So when you have a training modality that says, when you do this, I'll do that, at just like the physics level, the mathematical level, you're violating a rule. You can't move faster than, you've got to weather the ambush and then counter it. And so what we do that is I think important is we take the what we call a primary initiation attack. Is it a headbutt? Is it a stab? Is it a gun? Is it a sucker punch? And we've got a series of drills around that help educate the part of the brain called the reticular activating system. And we do these slow drills where we're like literally training the brain to pick up on the auditory, visual, and in some cases tactile pre-contact cues. What this does is it enhances and triggers a startle response faster because you've trained it. Then what we do is we in a very calculated way, we call this ballistic microfight. It's a ballistic, not kinetic, ballistic, like explosive. We start building up the speed of that big bang moment. And then the coolest thing we do, remember the 3Ds, detect, diffuse, defend? We then take what we call the timeline of violence, and then we move it back and back, almost like we're rewinding the scenario. The joke I often make when I watch people practice self-defense, I go, if you remember in Star Trek, they could beam down anywhere. And people would start their scenario like if I said to you, Chance, you teach jujitsu, if I said to you, hey, show the class, how to get out of a rear strangle, one of your students would walk up to you, turn around, and give his back to you so you could put the, right. And that's like called the Star Trek model, where you're going like you would never do that in a street attack. You could be surprised, but why don't we reverse engineer the scenario? So the way we explain it is stimulus response is here, stimulus response. It's actually backwards, like if you think about it, because if you look at it visually and graphically, the enemy moves first. We need to react. We don't respond. We react to contact. So we start to look at what happened before I had to do the escape from the choke. What happened before, what was going on before. And so like if you think about when you guys learned like gun disarms, right? And I've got a trusty CERT prop over here. So if I've got like, a weapon comes up, 99%, and I'm talking military and law enforcement, their gun disarm training starts with the gun in their face. That's the Star Trek model. And they go, well, I would do this. Okay, I inverted J, a figure eight, I just sweep the leg, whatever it is. And at some point, once you've learned that, what was omitted, and it was an accidental, obviously no one's doing it deliberately. Nobody said, well, how did he get there? Did he beam down from another planet from the Starship Enterprise? So I would go, okay, did the guy walk into the room with the gun already out? Is it under his shirt? And we would start building that in. And so what this did, it's kind of cool. If action's faster than reaction, what would happen if you trained with me if I put you in action with a hyphen? Inaction beats action, right? So the inaction part is I've been trained what to look for before that gun came in my face, before the headlock came on, before the strangle. I've been trained on the auditory, visual, and tactile pre-contact cues. What this does is it gives my brain, the combat computer part of my brain, better speed. And so in my talk, come full circle, in my talk, Violence Loves Speed, I talk about mind speed and how to improve mind speed. Where a lot of people practice drawing fast, punching fast, slipping fast, blocking fast. That's only part of it. If you can't manage the fear spike and you can't communicate the correct move, then the mind speed part is what the problem was, not your physical skills. And I could talk quite a bit on like the neuroscience and research around like this dopamine romantic effect. If I ask, Chance, are you mostly jiu-jitsu, or are you a mixed martial artist?
Mostly jiu-jitsu now, but I studied Shaolin Wushu for a little while and some Taekwondo back in the day, and all kinds of stuff. So
and Shaun, do you have like a something that you love, or is there or are you mixed now?
I'm mixed, stand up and ground.
Okay, so like right now, and if I said to you, Chance, you got your ATM, you just took out a couple $100, you turn around and there's a guy there, strong arm robbery. He goes, give me your money. He's just standing there, like this, and you can see he's not armed. He's just a big guy going, give me your money. In theory, and again, I don't know you, we're just meeting. You're thinking, I'm going to take this guy down. I'm going to choke him out, or I'm going to secure him while somebody calls the cops. Because most of what your brain has acclimated to do is the grappling. We all know what Shaun's going to do. He's going to sucker punch the guy with a time lag, right? But if I ask a Taekwondo guy what he would do, he's going to select something from Taekwondo, not from Jiu-Jitsu. If I ask a boxer, he's standing there, he's going, well, I'm going to drop this guy with a liver shot or an uppercut. He's not going to go jump back kick. And so when we fall in love with our martial arts, without thinking about it in the context of personal safety and what real violence does to us and what it looks like and when it happens, what happens is our romantic relationship with that art and the dopamine effect from creating neural patterns. There's no such thing as muscle memory in the way people want to believe. There is muscle memory, not by definition. There's neural patterns. There's motor engrams. You train your body to move a certain way. And you got to ask yourself, is this the ideal response, the optimal thing to do right now? And if your romantic relationship with your art interferes with what might be but we should run right now. Like there's been a couple of situations in my life where like I just got the hell out of there as fast as I could. And it wasn't because I didn't know how to fight or I wasn't tough or I couldn't manifest courage. I was like, yeah, this is really scary and I'm not prepared for this level of violence and I'm not interested in it. This isn't personal. I'm out of here. Right. And so that's an interesting conversation. But all of that there, a long answer is I've been studying violence, fear, and aggression for decades. When Mitch got dropped in 1980, that punch hit him harder, hit me harder than it hit him, because as a passionate, obsessed self-defense guy, I felt like I let him down, and I felt like everything that influenced how I trained didn't prepare me to teach him. I set off on this different journey of going, we need to study the neuroscience of fear, not the physiology of fear. Some people get an adrenaline dump, some people don't. Some people like violence, most don't. I remember I would always interview fighters, victims of violence. And I remember pro fighters, how do you prepare? How do you manage fear? And nobody liked to talk about it. Notice in the last couple of years, the Tyson interviews, George St. Pierre interviews, and some of these top fighters now finally emoting about how much fear. George St. Pierre saying the worst day of his life is every day he has to fight. But the reason he went through it is he wanted what the platform, he wanted freedom. And he knew that if he was a world champion, he would have access to anything he wanted. And so he was willing to commit to that. Tyson admitting that he used to throw up and cry before fights. And nobody ever talked about this. So, back in the days when I was talking about fear, this is going back, like no fear started in the 80s. And I remember talking to Maurice Smith, who was WK K1 champ, one of the great kickboxers of our time. And I said, Maurice, I always interview fighters, like, what's your pre-fight ritual? How do you handle fear? And he goes, he's like, man, I'm like headphones on a massage table, just chilling out for the fight. I go, wow, that's like, because you would see one guy like walking around the room, punching his face, another guy banging his head on a locker, somebody else, with a sewing machine leg, just like sitting on the bench and the legs going up and down like that. Everyone deals with the physiology of fear differently based on their experience. 1 fight, 10 fight, 20 fights. I'm sure, Shaun, the first time you jumped out of an airplane for a training mission versus deployment, completely different physiology to 50 jumps later, 100 jumps later, or real mission, and the new guys there going, and you're like, hey, you're gonna be okay, man. Like we all deal with it differently. But Maurice said this, imagine this, such a movie out of a line out of a movie. I said, how do you do with like the pre-fight jitters? And he looks at me, goes, let me ask you a question. And I'm like, cool, okay, go. He goes, do you have a job? And I said, I do. He said, are you afraid to go to work? I said, no, I'm not. He goes, me either. But he'd gotten to a point, like after 50 fights, international fights, where this was how he fed his family. This was his job. If we tried to model that, we might all get knocked out or shot or whatever, because like that's a unicorn statement for me. I remember, you guys know Mike Redlin, former SEAL. Yeah. So Mike had me on his podcast, and we got really heavy into fear. And he said, man, like we'd be in a stack outside the building, and I knew every single male inside that building was going to try and kill us, and we had to do that first. And he said, we were scared shitless, but we knew we were trained, and this was our mission. Like nobody wants to die. It's not that Gary Sinise character in Forrest Gump. Stop saving me. I was supposed to die here, right? And anyways, I'm down 90 rabbit holes, so I'll just.
It's all good. We like to go on tangents on this show, so it's this is pretty awesome, Shaun. And interesting enough, actually, we were talking to our buddy Craig Weller from I just forgot the title of the book, but
Building the Elite.
Building the Elite. Thank you very much. And one of the things he was saying was, last time we were talking, was the fact that you require fear to be courageous. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was such a great point in the fact of, that if you aren't afraid, that's an outlier. If you're going into something that is that you need to be courageous in, then it seems to not be afraid would be odd almost in that
Yeah,
point.
there's a passage, if I could just insert something, there's a passage in our No Fear training program that is almost verbatim that. And the line is, um, you can't be brave if you're not afraid. That the primary ingredient of courage is fear. That if you said to somebody, "Oh my God, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen," and they go, "What are you talking about?" Then they didn't know, and therefore that wasn't courageous for them, right? So it's it's I 100% agree with what he said, and that's the big reframe. The most important course that we teach now is our no fear training, because I believe there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of stats and examples of people who are really well trained that didn't win their last fight or didn't perform at their best. And the difference on game day is always mindset. There's no time for any more training. So if you said to me, someone's going to train with you, Tony, they're going to learn the spear, they're going to learn elbows and knees, and they're going to learn all that, but you can't teach them anything about the neural circuitry of fear and mindset and self-talk, or they can't do any physical training, they can only learn your fear management. I would only do the fear management if I could only choose. Why? Because in every study for the last, again, 30, 40 years of me talking to victims of violence, every victim of violence who lived to tell the tale said that a bad feeling before the attack. So that's an internal intuitive GPS. Something's off here. And when you feel something's off, you immediately get a fear spike. And in order to turn fear into fuel, you need to recognize that moment. And now you need to have something to do. And that's what we teach in No Fear. That you can't be brave if you're not afraid. So if you can turn fear into fuel, you can amplify and manifest that courage that you need. And it has nothing to do with your physical skill sets. That's what you need to drive that, right? You need that, and you see this in sports all the time, right? The two teams are playing each other, and this team gets smoked. Well, if they're playing in a championship level, they all had the physical attributes to get there, but something happened emotionally, psychologically on game day. It's a powerful reframe.
Absolutely. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. I agree with Tony on the mindset aspect. I mean, if you've got to choose learning how to fight or learning how to mindset, learn how to mindset. And so, with that out of the way, I'll give an example of when I first understood this as clear as day. And so, I was in special operations, or tier 1, and I was one of the first guys to go down and work at Delta or CAG. And I had the privilege of being put on their course for portions of their course as a candidate. And so one of the modules that I did was the close protection agent module. And so part of that is in different parts of the country, and then part of it is right there at their facility. And so as part of this, we were doing a scenario-based training or scenario exercise where the principal was an important person, and I was assigned as the lead agent. So I was moving alongside of him. And as we were moving through the facility, moving up the stairs, moving down the stairs, through the back stairs, and all of the various locations that we're moving through, as part of the simulation, there was American operators that would be moving towards me, walking down a set of stairs and kind of throwing out that energy. Nothing in their hands, nothing on their hips, no overt threat. But they were throwing out that energy to test the response from 50, 60, 120 feet away. I was evaluating them, determining what the threat was. Now, this is a really important detail. The only reason I learned the lesson that I'm about to describe is because before I showed up there, I was already an Army sniper and a special operations sniper. And I'd spend a boatload of time looking at humans through high-powered optics and trying to understand their patterns, trying to understand what's between their eyes and behind their eyes. And so I was a student of human interaction at a distance. And so as all of these characters were moving towards me, I was trying to determine what they were all about before they got to me. And so I was feeling it. Like I was feeling the stress of the moment. I was feeling the energy bleed. I was like bleeding off unnecessary energy because I had a lot to process. It was bandwidth that I wasn't used to burning at such a ferocious rate, at such a wide uptake of all of the details in the environment on my 360 that I wouldn't have been able to do what I was doing on that first day for an entire year. And so in that moment, what I had to understand was I've got to adjust how I play this game as a close protection agent. I can't be 110% heads up radar constantly for the rest of my life. I've got to figure out how to ebb and flow. I've got to figure out how to offload some of this stuff. I've got to take some pattern recognition and start turning it into instinct. And I've got to apply some more intuition than I am right now. So basically, I had to learn how to move through the world in a bit of a different way after that first day down at Delta. And so, years later, being we'll call it a VIP protection agent or a bodyguard for anyone out there who likes that term, it's a hard life to do that life at 100% heads up radar 24/7. You just can't. So what you have to learn to do is ebb and flow. Understand what you're stepping into, modulate your situational awareness to the environment that you're in, and then when you step out of that environment, decompress that situational awareness so that you're not frazzling at the edges, so that you're not 100% all the time. You have to learn how to move through the world, understanding not what you're in, but what you're moving into. And so it's that precognition, it's that pre-thought, it's that pre-plan, it's that pre-process, it's that when the door opens up 2 stories above you on the fire escape, the time to recognize that is not when they're standing in front of you. It is to recognize it when the door opens and start the pre-processing. And so what Tony said syncs up with what I've experienced. And if you don't want to learn how to fight, then learn how to mindset. And as part of that mindset, you have to learn how to ebb and flow your mindset from 100% down to 10% and back and forth on an as-need basis.
Absolutely. This is it brings up an interesting thought. I wrote down earlier that how I was going to bring up AARs, after action reviews, and to the point that like pre-planning is so important, but also understanding that when either things don't go your way or they do go your way, but to stop and take the time to actually assess what happened and then say, did that work or not? Just like you were talking about, Shaun, and the fact that you had to make that call kind of on the fly of going, man, this is too much. How do I make it work? Rather than this is just too much, and then off, and then, like, and never think about it again. So I'm wondering, Tony, I mean, you were talking about this as well, and that the requirements for understand, like, doing after action reviews. What do you think?
Yeah, it's something that we do a lot, and we use the term AAR a lot with our folks. Shaun mentioned that the whole bodyguard term, executive protection, close protection agent, and we have a course. I also, again, I said earlier that the 80s were my incubator period. In the 80s, I coined this. It was part of our program. It was the Be Your Own Bodyguard moment, and we now have a course and a whole program called Be Your Own Bodyguard. And it was this idea that only VIPs get bodyguards, but you're a VIP in your life. How do you become your own bodyguard, and what's involved? And if you wait till somebody's got their hands around your throat or the gun is in your face, and sometimes you have no choice, just the circumstances. That's just where you open your eyes and the threat was there. But most of the time, it's not. Like the rant I did earlier. There's something that happened before, and you just weren't paying attention. So there's a couple of tips I can share with your audience. And I suspect a lot of your audience are people who are familiar with you. So this might be like elementary school level stuff. But as your podcast grows in popularity, maybe there's people that don't have your background or training. But one of the ways you can do something, if you're not part of a unit or organization that's going to put you in world-class training is two things that I tell people to do. And here's an interesting thing is one of the times when I was down at that special place that you mentioned earlier, and I that's actually where I was on V9/11, by the way. So I got crazy memories, and I've been there many times over the years. And there was one of the squadrons there just loved scenario training, and they would bring me back in all the time. And one of the years that I was there, the year earlier, a Navy SEAL was stabbed to death outside of, the bar, restaurant, Hot Tuna in Virginia Beach. You guys ever been there? It's like a famous bar, but he was stabbed to death out there. The guy was like badass tier 1 guy, but he got stabbed to death by an altercation with some guys with some, alcohol involved and all that. When he wasn't part of a 12-man element, he was vulnerable. And when he wasn't, getting game ready, it's game day, we're getting ready to go, and he wasn't, shifting into that mindset. This is the part where I always say that situation awareness is a conscious cognitive skill. You got to be awake and you got to know what you're looking for. And so sometimes what happens is we develop training around a special environment or a special scenario, not realizing that, it's situational awareness that prevents us from getting run over by a car when we're crossing the street. It's situational awareness that intuition, instinct, intelligent moment where we're about to take a bite of some food. It's like pre-food poisoning, second bite. You get that bite and something's off. Your olfactory system goes, something was off there. You put it in your mouth. I've done this many times where I go, shit, I'm not eating this. And I'm sure you guys have had food poisoning once or twice. It's almost the worst, right? But so what I tell people is most people already practice self-defense and have like situational awareness that was learned through osmosis, but they don't apply it to actual physical self-defense. And so here's 2 exercises you can do. One is, and they're such cool exercises. One is for a day or two, when you're at the gas station, when you're at a Starbucks, when you're walking around, think like a predator. Who would you attack? Whose kid could you grab? Whose purse could you grab?
Hang on a sec. We're not allowed to do that every day? Just kidding.
That was great delivery, man. I thought I was about to violate some like FCC thing, but you caught me there. So for people who aren't like someone like you, Shaun, of course, that's just the way you think, and it might even be one of the reasons why you gravitated into the field that you did, because it was just, I did that as a kid. Like I was always ready to get jumped by a shadow. Every building, at 7 years old, I was, pine door. Like it was just natural for me. I just thought I was a weirdo. But this is a really interesting exercise where when you start watching who you could attack, what you're actually educating is the D1 part of the timeline of violence, the detect and avoid. I tell the story when I was meeting my wife for a meeting. We had just moved here to San Diego, and she's on a phone call with headphones on. Her purse is hanging off the back of her chair. It's not zipped up, and she's got some legal documents that we had to go over. And there's my coffee. She said, I'll meet you here. And I walk up, she doesn't see me. And there's a guy sitting on the bench behind her, like doing this sort of thing, like looking like this with his elbows on his knees, like he's getting ready to run. And I take a picture of her. I wrote a blog post about it that actually on the server we were using then, it went so viral that the platform we're using like locked our account because we didn't have enough bandwidth on it. Because what I did is I said, look at every mistake my wife is making here. She has headphones on, so she has no auditory sense. She's looking at documents, she's talking, she has her purse in the back of a chair. I said, this guy might just be sitting here, but he might also be, part of a human trafficking ring. He might also just be a purse snatcher. Everything is wrong. She wasn't happy about it, but it was an amazing. And this is, so if you were doing that exercise, you would go, I could grab her purse. She would never hear me. I could walk by, just grab her purse. I could put a tracking device in her purse. I could, she seems like she's kind of oblivious. I'll just walk to her car and get her license and follow her, here. She'll never even notice, because somebody who noticed that shit wouldn't be sitting like this. Right. And so you notice that stuff. And what that does is it starts to educate your RAS in your brain, your reticular activating system. And the connection is, am I doing any of those things? And the second drill, it's a fantastic one. It's a little creepy, but it's a fantastic one to do. And the second one is, it requires a little bit more self-awareness and a little bit more honesty, is to ask yourself, when would I attack me? When do I just assume I'm safe? And you're a police officer and you come home after a long day and you take your gun off and you throw it on the couch there. You live alone. You go into the kitchen and grab a beer. You go, I'm home. Well, the bad guy's sitting in your kitchen and your gun's in the living room, right? And I'm not saying let's be paranoid and clear our house every time we come home, but it's like, when would you attack you? And what would you do there if that happened? And then start to think about that. And so it's kind of like this is like a pre-action review as opposed to an after-action review. Like sometimes you don't get to do the after-action. But anyways, I wanted to throw those two things out.
No, those are fantastic. My mouse isn't working today for some reason. When I was doing my booby trap training for the engineers, one of the first things they told us was, how would you kill you? Figure that out first, and then start your searches, and then start your planning, and then start your so on and so forth. So we got pretty devious with it. And when you really take the time to delve into almost how easy it is to actually take people out or to engage other people, it's surprising the first time you do it. But then you do it enough times, you start to find those pieces, start to find those sequences here. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, in reference to what Tony just dropped down there, which is legit, it reminds me of growing up as a kid in England before we moved over to Canada. I used to watch the Pink Panther, but not the cartoon, the movie with Peter Sellers and Kato. Frickin' Kato jumping out of the closet. Kato jumping off of the chandelier. Kato jumping out of the fridge. Frickin' Kato jumping out of everything. I loved it, man. Like, I don't know what it was about that show. The humor was pretty good. And Peter Sellers played a pretty funny part. But Kato, it was all about Kato for me. And so I loved that show because what it encouraged me to do was kind of do the same. I looked at the world around me whenever I'd step into a room. I'd be looking for Kato. And I know that sounds weird. I still do it to this day. Not like physically looking for Kato, but that's how my mind is wired now. It is a long-formed neural pattern that when I step into a place, I'm looking for Kato. And by the way, it's not like looking on this plane of existence. It's looking on this plane of existence as well. So depending on how you were raised, depending on how you surrounded yourself with characters, you didn't have to be surrounded by tier 1 assassins to learn how to do things in life. You could just pay attention to a freaking movie and learn a lot, as long as you're looking for the right clues in the movie, which means that you got to know what you're looking for. And for me, as a kid, I was always looking for self-defense, martial arts, how to kick that ass. And so Kato taught that to me for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We have we're almost on an hour now here, so we're gonna cut it short here quickly. But I just have a couple of comments that I want to touch on because they are fantastic, and it's kind of humorous. This came up right as you started talking about it, Tony. Tim jumped in here. He said, "My favorite part of spear philosophy is detect, diffuse, defend, detect. You get that spidey sense feeling, leave. Love it. It's pure situational awareness." So absolutely. I think that's great. Winterstorm jumped in here on this. He said, "Assume you will be 2 steps behind in any battle and train accordingly. Be surprised, underarmed, tired, and train to overcome that," which is 100% great plan for that. And then he also said to remind me never to fuel up next to Shaun. So, and one more here. Never thought I would take training advice from the Pink Panther, but that's the thing. You can get all kinds of information from places you never think of initially. So always keep your mind open, always keep your eyes open. Now, any final thoughts? Anything on anything we've gone over, which we've covered quite a bit, but anything still bubbling in the back of your brain there, Tony?
No, I mean, it's funny. Sean and I are near the same age and had very similar influences because I use the reference of the Clouseau, Cato, Pink Panther stuff all the time, and I had a couple of students that we did that. If we'd gotten close, if you were over at my house and you took your eyes off me, you're going to get a back fist in the head. Obviously we weren't drawing blood and breaking noses, but it would be like, hey Steve, what's that? Oh shit! You would, and we were just always playing that. So I don't know if it was our generation, but the '60s and the TV shows. It's one of the things that was a big influence on me, watching the Green Hornet with Bruce Lee, watching, of course, Batman, Streets of San Francisco, the Wild Wild West was my favorite show. And what it was there were always bad guys, and the good guy always got in a fight and always got the girl because he got in the fight and won the fight. And in some stereotyped way, that influenced me. I'm right with you, Sean, with the I was actually writing about this, and I wrote an article on my Substack feed called Accidental Mentors. And the gist of this was this idea that you can find spiritual guides and mentors without necessarily hiring somebody to mentor you, or actively, if you just stay open to it. And this is a self-awareness piece. And I do this, I write a lot about this, but I talk about situational awareness is irrelevant if it can't communicate with self-awareness. In other words, if I see something's wrong, but I'm too afraid to be the courageous bystander or tell myself to take action, then the fact that I saw it meant it was irrelevant to me. So I really think there's a deeper, more metaphysical side to situational awareness. And that's that connection to self-awareness of, I know what I have to do here and I'm scared. And this is this whole intersection with fear management. And I really believe that it's overlooked. If we could get parents to be teaching their kids to like, no one ever taught me that growing up in the 60s or 70s. My coach's mentor family, it was, if you were scared, you didn't tell anyone, and you just sucked it up, buttercup, and you went through it. And I'm not saying to milk it and be vulnerable to get attention, but just this idea. Don Fry, I make this joke in UFC number 10. I had Joe Rogan's job. A lot of people don't know this. I make the joke that I was so bad doing it that Joe Rogan got the job after that. But I was backstage interviewing all the guys. Tank Abbott was fighting. Don Fry was acting. And Don Fry comes up to me. We had really connected. There was a chemistry there the whole week leading up to the fight. And when he found out that in the final he was fighting Don Fry was fighting Tank Abbott, Fry comes up to me, puts his head on my head, leans against me and whispers, "Pray for me, brother." Like people were afraid, but we didn't. So I'm trying to get people to go, it's okay to say you're afraid. What's not okay is to not do what you're afraid of. Some things in life you need to do afraid. And if you get to do them enough times, that fear becomes something you don't even notice anymore. It's just part of the pre-event ritual that you're doing. I know we're running out of time, but I want to share a very specific example, if I can. When I was down at Fort Bragg, prepping for some work, I met two of the operators I was working with at a coffee shop after our talk of what the course was going to be like for the next 5 days. One of the guys says to me, "Hey, do you want to go jumping with us later?" And I go, "Jumping, like up and down?" And I do this with my fingers on the table, like up and down. He goes, "Ha ha ha." He goes, "No, skydiving." And I said, "Hold on a second, let me check." "Oh my God, I'm busy." He goes, "Oh, Like, you don't want to go? I go, no, jumping out of an airplane was not, I think I've got to, oh yeah, I'm going to be lying down in my bed watching TV. I'm not going jumping. And he then has air quotes. He goes, I thought you're Mr. Fear Management. And I said, yeah, I'm managing my fear by not jumping out of an airplane. And so he starts laughing. Now there's two guys. One guy, the guy that asked me, laughs like, ha ha ha. The other guy laughs a nervous laugh, like, and I knew immediately that guy hated jumping, but he was in the same unit. And this is the point of the story. I looked at the guy who asked me, who invited me. I said, let me ask you a question about fear. I said, you got no fear jumping? He said, I love it. I got like 600-700 jumps. I mean, I go anytime I can, recreationally, of course, for the unit. I said, and no fear. He goes, no. And I said, so I want to come with you today and I want to help out. What I'd like to do is pack your secondary chute for you. And I go, before you say yes or no, let me tell you, my wife does not let me fold t-shirts. She's like, get away. And I'm horrible at folding. So I'm going to fold your parachutes for you. And he looks at me with a little like evil smile and he goes, you're not coming anywhere near my parachute. And I paused. I said, fear? What are you visualizing right now? And he went, holy shit. Like I had changed his ritual even hours before that. He got a fear spike because what was he visualizing if Tony Blauer touched his parachute was some sort of malfunction. And the message of the story here is that guy loved jumping. The other guy didn't like skydiving, but he got really good at it because that's the only way he could be in the unit. There was a skill set that was needed. So you can be skilled and still be afraid, but my buddy Andy Stump, right? Base jumping. I asked him on one of our podcasts, dude, no fear. Looks like you have no fear. He says, scared shitless, man. That's why I train so hard. And that's why I prepare meticulously. So a lot of people don't talk about fear the way I do, but they have it. And it's just been replaced with cooler words like preparation, meditation, breathing, flow state. Yeah. So anyways, I want to share
all those things. Absolutely. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Two things. One is for Tony, one is for the audience. The first thing is I'd be one of the guys at that table, the terrified guy, because I'm terrified of jumping. And I got about 370 jumps and all of the fast ropes. And so, and in fact, a guy who's currently tracking this right now live, Tim Turner, I'll be jumping out of a perfectly good airplane with him this summer as he deploys me yet again for my third year in a row at Operation Pegasus Jump, freaking laughing at me as I fearfully exit the plane, looking like I'm cool as a cucumber. And so I am terrified of heights, always have been, but I have never, ever, ever failed to go out that door, go off that rope, do that thing, because if you can't do it for yourself, you got to do it for something bigger than yourself. And for me, it was the team. And so it's done the day before done kind of thing. So that's never held me back. You've just got to know your why. And then for the other thing, specifically for you, Tony, you're talking about, some of the classic movies that you were brought up on, some of the classic series that you were brought up on. Me too. Inspector Clouseau, as I already stated. I think, and I've given this some thought in the past, and maybe you can chew on it for another day, but in our generation, the villain and the good guy, things were simpler. You could kind of see the plot. You could kind of see what was building up. You could see how, like, before Clouseau walked into that room, you knew Kato was going to do his jam. And so you were prepping for that. You were looking for that. You were thinking about that. You were observing what the response would be. But nowadays, plots aren't as simple. The action isn't as simple. As a casual observer, it all just looks really chaotic. But back then, it was thematic or plot sensitive, and you could see the buildup. You could determine what's what. And so our generation, we were kind of raised on like skill. We were skill observing, but nowadays it's chaos observing. And so I think that we had a little bit of a leg up on that sort of a situation.
Yeah. There's an interesting point on that, in that fact that what I grew up in, because I'm 40, so I'm a good generation after you guys, But when you guys were growing up, because I used to watch the same kind of shows that you guys were talking about, because my parents liked to watch them, right? So I would get the reruns and all that stuff. But the key was, I think, good and bad had a very distinct separation. And for TV and movies, that's a good thing because you have the good guy and you have the bad guy. When in reality, it's a lot more shades of gray in between what is good and what is bad, and it's very iffy. And I think that one of the challenges nowadays, I'm going to leave this as a thought for the audience, is what's on TV and movies is designed to be in that gray zone, so that there's less, is this guy a good guy or is he a bad guy? Or sorry, there's more of that versus this guy is a good guy and this guy's a bad guy. I tried to explain it to my boys a little bit about the old school white hat versus black hat system, but it is something that we should all be thinking about, is the fact that life is never as clear cut as that. But that's part of understanding how life works. So I think that's something we should all be thinking about. Again, Tony, thank you so much for the conversation. This has been awesome. We're going to get you back on very quickly. Looks like Tim is inviting you to come to Pegasus Jump, or I should say he is ordering you to come to Pegasus Jump. So that's in July. See if your schedule is open. But what's up?
I said, hopefully my schedule isn't open.
It's a lot of fun. The overall system is really engaging. I wasn't a jumper when I was in the military. I always wanted to jump, and then that's how I got my name Big Bird, which is a tale for another time because we've done that a few
Tony,
times on the
don't
show.
worry. You and I can hold hands and look into each other's eyes dreamily and jump out of the plane together, both terrified.
There
I'll
you go.
support you, buddy. I'll support you.
Maybe we can do tandem facing each other.
That's how to do a jump right there. That would be amazing, especially the two of you with your hair flowing in the wind. It'd be amazing. Anyway, again, really do appreciate the convo. Both Tony and Shaun, this has been awesome. I look forward to having you on again soon. We'll get you as soon as we can. And other than that, while everybody's out there listening to us, they should be continuing to learn, continuing to build, and continuing to grow every day. We'll see y'all next week. Chimo.